All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the March meeting of Workers Strike Back. This month, we're going to be talking about the strategy to stop the war on Iran. My name is Joan. I'm a union tech worker with Kickstarter, United, OPIU 153. I've been a member of Workers Strike Back since its founding. Workers Strike Back is a nationwide organization fighting for working people against the billionaires, both the Democratic and the Republican parties. Workers Strike Back members are rank and file union members, non-unionized workers, working class retirees, and students who are fighting back against the bosses and their political representatives in our schools and workplaces and in the streets. As with all of our meetings, we're going to begin with a political discussion. We'll have a main speaker, and then we'll go into an open discussion. And of course, many of us know Workers Strike Back democratically voted to endorse Shama Sawant for U.S. Congress. So we'll also be getting an update from the campaign about that fight against genocidal Democrat Adam Smith. So then at the end of the meeting, we're going to hear about, like I said, Shama's campaign, the activities that we're doing as Workers Strike Back members, and other stuff that Workers Strike Back members have been up to. So I'll be chairing the meeting, which means that once we get into our open discussion, I'll be keeping track of who wants to get on the speakers list. You can raise your hand. So if you want to speak, you are welcome to. I'll let you know when to raise your hand after our main speaker. So that gets us to our main discussion for today. Our main speaker today is a revolutionary socialist who has gone to war for working people for over a decade in Seattle and nationally. She used her Seattle City Council office to launch and lead movements to win the nation's highest minimum wage. She defeated billionaires like Jeff Bezos to win the Amazon tax, which raises hundreds of millions of dollars every year for affordable housing. She also won an increase in the Amazon tax to ensure publicly funded free abortion for anyone who needs it in Seattle. And she also won countless historic renters' rights victories. As a city council member, she took home the average worker's wage, donating the rest after taxes to labor union strike funds, movements for workers, and fights against oppression. And now she's running as an independent for U.S. Congress. And if elected, she'd become the first ever revolutionary socialist in Congress. Electing Shama to Congress would be an absolute breakthrough that we desperately need nationally. She is also a member of the elected National Coordinating Committee of Workers Strike Back. So please welcome Shama Sawant.
Thank you, Joan, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. And good evening to everybody who's watching over live stream as well. It's now over 2 weeks that Trump and US imperialism launched this brutal assault on Iran. Over 3,000 people have been killed in Iran, over 1,000 more in Lebanon, Iraq, and other nations in the region, many of them children, and hundreds of thousands of people have been forcibly displaced. The attacks covered Iran's capital in a cloud of toxic smoke and black rainfall when Israeli strikes on several fuel depots caused fires to burn for hours. Something like a black monster has swallowed the sky over Tehran, one resident was quoted as saying in the media. This is a horrific escalation by US imperialism and the Israeli state that once again threatens to engulf the entire Middle East in a disastrous and protracted war. Trump's stated goals are freedom, regime change, and nuclear weapons deterrence. In reality, the driving motivation is Iran and the region's oil wealth and strategic importance, and the desire to project US imperialist power in that region. All long-time bipartisan goals shared by both the Republican and the Democratic parties. And to be clear, the goal of regime change is an actual goal that US imperialism has towards many nations. including Iran. We must completely oppose and condemn this bipartisan assault on Iran by US imperialism. We must say no war on Iran. We must also oppose the long-standing vicious sanctions against the Iranian people backed by both parties. As socialists, we must oppose all economic sanctions against working people. Contrary to what we are often told, it is ordinary people who pay the price for sanctions, not the ruling class of the targeted nations. A recent study by the Lancet, it's a very unique and groundbreaking study. It found that since 1970, an estimated 38 million people have been killed as a result of economic sanctions imposed by the capitalist governments of the United States and Western Europe. 38 million people. Faced with the opposition from the vast majority of American working people, the Democrats, and we know that the Iran war is very unpopular among working people. Democrats are attempting to sound like they oppose Trump's war on Iran, but as with Venezuela, their objections have been mainly about complaining that Trump has not sought quote-unquote congressional authorization. This rings as totally hollow and performative, given that there has been bipartisan support for war after war by U.S. imperialism over decades, including the genocide in Gaza. So they want us to believe that the same Congress that voted to carry out the genocide in Gaza, that has voted repeatedly to fund ICE, is the Congress whose approval we should care about. The Democratic and Republican parties together represent American capitalism and have been the agents of bloody imperialist wars, coups, and regime change missions. And in fact, this particular war is being funded by the over $900 billion that the majority of Democrats in the House and the Senate voted for in December, along with the Republicans, and which was, effectively handing Trump a blank check for Iran, Venezuela, and any other conflict he chose to initiate. This $900 billion, along with another bill that was passed in September of last year, they together make up $1 trillion of military spending approved last year, making it the largest ever military spending package in U.S. history. So the Democrats have been instigators of the largest ever military spending package in U.S. history. Adam Smith, our opponent in the congressional election, has been one of those warmongering generals for American capitalism for nearly 3 decades. He has voted for the war and invasion of Iraq, back when some people weren't even born. Some people who are part of our campaign weren't even born, and is directly responsible for more than 1 million Iraqi people who were killed as part of that war and occupation. He also voted to pass the crippling sanctions against the working people of Iran and also sanctions against Iraq, and has voted for the tens of billions of dollars to genocide in Gaza. He is bankrolled by billionaires and the Zionist lobby, and is the #1 recipient of weapons industry money among Democrats. Smith is one of the many Democrats who needs to be on trial for war crimes. He's not an outlier, unfortunately. He is more accurately a norm for what the Democratic Party stands for. In fact, some of us were at a protest this afternoon. This protest was outside the Seattle Convention Center in Seattle downtown, and we were there protesting against what was happening inside, which was a war profiteer convention. Over 700 companies that trade in war and bloodshed were gathered there for their annual expo or whatever. And none other than Washington State Governor, Democrat Bob Ferguson, said he was proud to welcome them. This is the quote. He was proud to welcome them. Among those 700 plus companies was Palantir. Palantir that contributed the intelligence which led to the massacre of schoolgirls in Iran when a school was bombarded and 175 people were killed. In addition to the horrific human impacts of the assault on Iran are the very serious economic ones, which will also take a human toll, especially the longer the conflict drags on. The bombardment has prompted some of the world's largest producers of oil and gas to suspend production, including Qatar's liquefied natural gas or LNG facilities and Saudi Arabia's largest domestic refinery. The Strait of Hormuz, through which 20% of all oil of the world and 20% of all LNG passes through, has been almost entirely shut down. And global oil markets are suffering the largest supply disruption in history, according to the International Energy Agency. Oil and gas prices have both surged, prompting warnings about the impact on the global economy and cost of living. There has been a 40% increase in oil prices already, and all of this has, it doesn't just stay with oil. When oil prices increase, the prices of basically a whole host of goods and services go up. And as living standards and conditions for working people everywhere are already declining because of the long-term crisis of capitalism, hundreds of billions of dollars are being spent on these bloody conflicts, and then the brunt of the impact of that conflict will land on working class people. First and foremost, obviously, to the bloodshed and loss of life and maiming of people in the region, but on top of that, billions of people are going to pay the price for this conflict across the world. And then, if not, all of this wasn't bad enough, the United Nations has just released its statement where they say that they are genuinely extremely worried about a nuclear accident taking place that could unleash a bigger disaster than we could even imagine. So we must absolutely stand with working people and the oppressed people of Iran, the Middle East, the region, and everywhere, and fight to build a global anti-war movement and an independent struggle, including general strikes of the American, Iranian, and international working class in order to defeat US and Western imperialism and to bring down capitalism and its ruling classes everywhere. We need political and labor leadership that will organize against imperialist war and unambiguously fight for the working class. But here is the problem. Unfortunately, the overwhelming majority of the American labor leadership is tied to the Democratic Party and has failed to carry out even protests, let alone strike action, against Trump's ICE terror and the repeated bipartisan attacks in the form of budget cuts and job cuts on working class people. The labor leadership has refused to take action, even with the onslaught on Venezuela and now with the war on Iran, and before that, the genocide in Gaza. Being in alliance with the parties of capitalism and imperialism is part and parcel of the ideas, the strategy that is followed by most of the labor leadership, and that strategy can be encapsulated in the term business unionism, which is basically the idea, a false idea, that labor leaders should mediate between bosses and workers, that workers should quote unquote bargain with the bosses and mostly settle for crumbs while their living standards are rapidly getting eroded because of the attacks by the bosses. So in other words, business unionism is rejecting the fundamental reality under capitalism that the billionaires, the multimillionaires, their profits, their wealth, their greed is diametrically opposed to the needs of working class people. Their profits and their wealth only come from denying billions of us workers from our fair share, from the wealth that we produce, and their profits only exist because they rob us of our wages, and for us to win anything will require a fight against the bosses. So the idea that we could win anything by quote unquote bargaining with people who have all the power is completely mistaken. We have to build working class power, and the only way to build working class power is for workers to pose an actual threat to the profit machine of the bosses. And the only way we can pose that threat is by refusing to go to work, by withholding our labor, by carrying out work stoppages so that the profit machine shuts down. But this is completely being missed by the overwhelming majority of the labor leadership. So what we need so desperately is class struggle unionism, which understands, as we do in Workers Strike Back, that under capitalism, the profits of the bosses are, they have to be, we have to seize our right to strike actions to win what we need. And that is why we are fighting to build Workers Strike Back, because we can't just talk about building strike actions, because strike actions aren't being built by the labor leadership. That is why what we need is a reckoning in the labor movement against business unionism and to build class struggle unionism. And Workers Strike Back and our congressional campaign are the rare voices, tragically for the American working class, we are the rare voices calling for class struggle-based fight back nationally against the war on Iran. And we are using the same class struggle strategy we used to win the historic victory, some of which Dawn was talking about, through our Socialist City Council office here in Seattle for 10 years. We must oppose both the Republican and the Democratic parties of U.S. imperialism. Both of them support the current attack on Iran, no matter what the Democrats try to pretend. former Iranian leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, and we have to be clear that Trump's attempts at regime change, as he calls it, in Iran are really about wanting to install a government loyal to U.S. imperialism and the interests of the American capitalists, which is a goal shared by the Democratic Party. The 1953 to 1979 despotic regime of the Shah of Iran was also strongly supported by both parties. Sanctions were strongly supported by both parties. Ali Khamenei has since been replaced by his son Mojtaba Khamenei, and analysts broadly agree that it is very unlikely that the regime as a whole will be toppled by this war. And in reality, there is no actual alternative to the existing Islamist regime for US imperialism to be put in place at present. The Islamist regime actually has renewed cohesion and resolve now, as many serious analysts are saying. Just a quote from the Economist newspaper, they're saying that Khamenei's death unshackled the Islamist regime. They are more militant, nationalistic, and emboldened. So this is the opposite of what Trump claims he went to war for. Preventing Iran from developing a nuclear weapon has also been a perennial stated reason across Democratic and Republican presidencies for over 2 decades. The whole question of, oh, should we attack Iran? Should we not attack Iran? This has been a mainstay for over 2 decades. According to experts, nuclear weapon deterrence would require the United States to seize Iran's stockpile of their 60% highly enriched uranium. The problem is that this uranium stockpile is stored deep underground and would have to be seized manually, which would very likely need a massive deployment of US ground troops to enter Iran. And that would be an even more deadly situation. We must completely oppose and we must condemn this assault by US imperialism. And at the same time, we must also fully oppose the right-wing Islamist anti-worker Iranian regime, which only recently, before the war, carried out a brutal crackdown of the historic protest movement there and massacred tens of thousands of Iranian working people at the protests. Neither US imperialism nor the Iranian ruling class in any way stand for the interests of working and oppressed people, and we cannot support either. We need a global working class anti-war movement and mass strike actions by the labor movement. There are some on the left who take the simplistic position that the enemy of my enemy is my friend and implicitly or explicitly support the Iranian regime on this basis. But such a position is utterly mistaken. It is a dead end. The Iranian regime is no friend of working or oppressed people in Iran or elsewhere in the region. And, actually, we in Worker Strike Back and our campaign actually are unique because we refuse to take that position. We are also refusing to take the other position, which some who are giving cover, like the Democratic Socialists of America leaders, who take a position of soft support for US imperialism by refusing to condemn the bloody wars in a clear manner, and sometimes even portraying them as in the interests of oppressed people. American imperialism is in no way a friend of working people anywhere in the world. I mean, if that wasn't clear, I don't know what would be clear as far as the current global situation is concerned. So it's important that we are very clear about not supporting any imperialist regime, any capitalist regime. Both of these positions would be complete and fatal dead ends for the international working class. And we must be internationalists. Our enemies are the ruling classes in every capitalist nation, and our allies are other working and oppressed people in every nation, regardless of their nationality, ethnicity, religious belief, gender, sexuality, or skin color. We need an international working class solidarity if we are to end imperialist war and end the assault by the billionaire class on billions of us. And we have to fight for a socialist world as the only alternative to all these bloody wars, misery, and climate catastrophe that is on offer from capitalism. This would mean that the working class internationally would have to get organized into revolutionary movements to take into democratic public ownership the top corporations and the trillions of dollars of wealth created by the labor of billions of workers. It is only by the overturn of capitalism and the democratic control of society under socialism that workers can end the rule of the billionaire class and their apparatus of forever war and climate catastrophe. This war, as I said before, has already delivered a gut punch to every sector of the capitalist economy. And we know that if this war continues for any length of time, it will likely have catastrophic consequences for the global economy because it is going to, on top of everything else, compound the effect of Trump's tariffs and the Russia-Ukraine inter-imperialist proxy war. All of this scenario that we're surrounded by shows the very fragile stability of the capitalist system and the kind of bloody price that the capitalist class will extract in order to maintain their system at all costs. That is why we need international working class solidarity, and that is why building worker strike back in the United States and building our campaign for Congress is so essential. We know that the threat of what they call boots on the ground, deployment of US troops in Iran has not gone away. Trump keeps threatening to do that. And of course, we have to recognize that there's a lot at stake for US imperialism. It's not that straightforward for them because if they overreach, they understand, the more sober wing among them understand that it could have serious consequences. But they also face the overall situation of capitalism where the success or failure of this attack by them on Iran will raise questions of credibility of US capitalism in the context of a new world order. That world order is the contest for world domination between the US-led bloc of capitalist state and the China-led bloc of capitalist states. And so in this competition among the capitalist states, they are willing to sacrifice any number of working people, regardless of our nationality or race. And that is why we have a lot at stake ourselves as well. And we've seen how even though Trump has been completely unable to declare a quick victory or anything like that in Iran, he is still going forward. And he is doing this even though the vast majority of the American people are opposed to this war. And we should keep in mind that the starting point for this war is completely different than the starting point for the wars on Afghanistan and Iraq. The wars on Afghanistan and Iraq happened in the immediate wake of the horrific 9/11 attack. And in that context, the vast majority of American people agreed with the invasions, but then that very soon that agreement eroded, and it was huge disagreement, and masses of working people actually protested against the Iraq war even, and then since then, most American working class people are against any kind of ground deployment. So this is a reality that Trump has to contend with. But at the same time, we cannot rule it out because at the end of the day, they don't really care about working class people in any way. In fact, since the last few days, we're seeing more and more news about how Trump is considering that they should attack, the US imperialism should attack this place called Karg Island, which is a very crucial component of Iran's oil production. It's basically like a deep water port, and it's the mainstay of Iran's oil production. And if any Western imperialist power were to get control over Karg Island, it would actually give them control over basically all of Iran's oil production. And in other words, it will be like going for the jugular. But the problem is that going for Iran's jugular would mean absolute probably carnage of US soldiers as well. In fact, one speaker from Democracy Now! Characterized it as a potential suicide mission if the United States went and attacked Karg Island. But they're still not ruling it out. And that is why we have no choice but to actually take seriously the building of the anti-war movement. And our campaign for Congress, Workers Strike Back, we all have a crucial role to play in this movement. We have, as I said, the only campaign that is taking a clear position against the brutal war and calling for a permanent end to all US military aid to Israel. And we are calling for the war on Iran, the genocide in Gaza, and all US military aid to be stopped. We're saying no support for imperialist war. We're saying money for housing and healthcare, not war. We're fighting to build a global anti-war movement, including mass protests, civil disobedience, and general strikes. We're also fighting to shut down ICE, the detention centers, and to stop the deportations. And so I hope that people come into this discussion because it is so crucial for us to understand that our congressional campaign and the building of Workers Strike Back doesn't stand in isolation from these global events. We have no choice but to ourselves try to organize the rank and file of the American working class and overcome the failures of the American labor leadership. And that is why building Workers Strike Back is so crucial. Solidarity.
Thank you so much, Shama. Again, let's hear it one more time. So we're going to enter into the open discussion part of our meeting. If you have a thought, question for us, I am chairing the meeting. I'll be taking hands for the speakers list. So if you'd like to speak, feel free to go ahead now. Just raise your hand, get my attention. Just like that. Perfect. We can even get a few going, stacked back to back. Great, great, great. All right, that's a good one. Let's go with Neil first.
I will try to make this very, very quick. I am not in District 9. I'm in District 7. And I got a really cool note from my representative, Pramila Jayapal. It was about a bill that she's introducing, along with a few others, called the Justice for Hind Rajab Act. It's stupid. Basically, it says that the State Department is going to investigate itself and make recommendations for whether war crimes occurred. We were all there during the 9/11, or those of us who were there during the 9/11 Commission know that that's not going to work. We've tried this before. And I am not be surprised, maybe I should go place a bet on it online, that investigation will come up with nothing. But I'm less interested in the bill than I am in who's signing onto it and how that is relevant to our campaign here in Washington State. So there's some folks on here who are well known for being the Democratic Party's version of being against genocide, right? The bare moral minimum. Chris Van Hollen, Joaquin Castro, et cetera, et cetera. The introducer of the bill is Sarah Jacobs. I think it's really interesting that Sarah Jacobs is introducing a bill to demand justice for Hind Rajab, because she may actually be one of the subjects or recipients of this justice in that bill. What do I mean by that? So Sarah Jacobs, October 7th happens. In 2023 of that year, House Resolution 57, Jacobs votes yes on expressing a sense of Congress supporting the state of Israel. How else does she vote? Well, October 25th, standing with Israel as it defends itself against the barbaric war launched by Hamas and other terrorists. Yes. House Resolution 739, calling on Hamas to immediately release hostages taken during October 23rd attack on Israel. Yes. House Resolution 888, reaffirming the state of Israel's right to exist. Yes. And then on January 29th, 2024, Hind Rajab is murdered. And after she is murdered, there is a petition in April of that year for a humanitarian pause for 6 weeks, because that's going to solve the problem. And on April 20th, which, Sarah Jacobs signs, which is great. On the 20th, there's also a vote in favor of funding a $95 billion package incorporating aid for Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan, a militaristic package designed to support military efforts in all of those theaters. But her explanation was something in the middle of, well, this is good for both Israel and Palestine, and we're going to get that humanitarian aid in. A few months later, people in Palestine are starving to death. I'm sure it worked out real well. Here's my point. The other people on this list, Chris Van Hollen, Joaquin Castro, even Pramila Jayapal, you look at them and say, these are folks who have more or less been against the occupation and the genocide. Jacobs is not, but introducing this list with them is a great way for this politician to launder her image and the things that she has done. Literally, this Hind Rajab Act was signed by someone who financed Hind Rajab's murder. And I would be appalled, except that this is what they do. They pick 4 or 5 people who are going to be the ones that get all upset. Today it's Ro Khanna, tomorrow it's Pramila Jayapal, today it's someone else, maybe it's Chris Van Hollen. And they decide to declare that this is wrong and we should stand up. And what happens? Nothing. Do they campaign for a bill? No. Do they go out and whip for the bill? No. But what they do is create a pretext during election time to say, look at Sarah Jacobs. She's against the war in Gaza. You know what another email that I got in my inbox was from? Adam Smith. Adam Smith saying, I'm the one who's going to help you end the war. Well, he would know. He has all the damn receipts for the last 5 of them that we've been in. And this is why I no longer trust Democrats and why I am here. And I guess my question for the group is, we already know that after supporting Palantir, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, Dow Chemical, everyone with blood on their hands for 28 years in Congress, Adam Smith is suddenly going to discover that he's in favor of peace. And it's going to last just about as long as when Congress decides to declare war on Cuba or the next country. And if it's a Democrat in office, you can be damn sure he'll be standing up and saying, absolutely, let's go America. I think that politicians who spread misinformation about sexual violence, which has been proven to be a hoax, by the way, not just by the New York Times, but The Intercept and many other sources as well, who stood up and spread that genocidal rumor to justify all of the deaths in Gaza, should really think twice on their humanity. I don't know how a person can finance the death of a 12-year-old girl and then introduce a bill to launder their political image before an election using her name. Solidarity.
Thank you, Neil. We're going to have Joe and then Josie go next. And just as a reminder, we have about 25 minutes for everyone to discuss. So we've got a pretty healthy amount of time. Again, if at any point you'd like to come in and speak, feel free to raise your hand. Even if someone else is talking, just get my attention. I'll get you on the list. And at the end of the discussion, we'll have Shama also sum up and give us a conclusion at the end of that 30 minutes. But please welcome Joe.
Thanks, Joan. And thank you, Shama, for the excellent introduction to our discussion today. I just couldn't agree more with those points. Yeah, I just agree. It's extremely important that we're all here and having these discussions. We need like Shama was saying, the labor movement and the working class at large, we need a reckoning in terms of our organization. So I wanted to talk more today about why internationalism is essential for the workers' movement. And as socialists, we are internationalists. I could not agree more that we say no war on Iran. Capitalism is an international system. Workers make literally everything run. We do all of the work, and all of our work is connected. Our allies are other working and oppressed people, regardless of where they come from. And we fight for one another. This is the only strategy to defeat capitalism. All of our struggles are connected. And so the crushing of one group of working people leads to the weakening of all of us as well. And so we stand in solidarity with the Iranian working class who are being bombarded right now, with the students who were brutally massacred by the regime while they were protesting, and others in the region. But those others don't include the capitalist class. Those are our enemies. And we should not shy away from that fact at all. We should call them by name. And it's not that we wish it were this way. This is the objective reality of the situation. These people make our lives living hell. So we need to call out who they are so that we have a good understanding of what we're up against and how we organize against them. And on that note, just to briefly say, I didn't really introduce myself. A lot of folks here know me, but not everybody, and also on the live stream as well. I have worked as a teacher for the last 8 years. I'm now also an organizer on the Shema for Congress campaign. And a few years ago, my union, the Washington Education Association, endorsed Bob Ferguson. And you know, Bob Ferguson has gone through all of these cuts and attacks on the working class, which we organized against, but also to hear today that he is, and I just read the quote of him saying, we're so proud that these aerospace and these weapons manufacturers are in downtown Seattle today. Screw that. You don't think, and I'm saying to the WEA leadership as well, you don't think we have Iranian children in our classrooms? You don't think we have children in our classrooms with family from the Middle East, and you're going to say, we're so happy that you're here? Screw you, Bob Ferguson. We're naming you. So, it's extremely important also, you know, that we discuss how we talk to working people about this. And so we don't agree with the false choices put forward to us by the corporate media, whether you're watching CNN or Fox or NPR or KUOW or whatever it is. You know, we don't agree that this is a question of taking the side of the interests of the capitalist class in the U.S. or the regime in Iran. It's neither of those. It's what is in the interest of the working class internationally. And this is also, as Workers Strike Back members, when we're talking to other working class folks, when we say we should be talking just about the working class. We don't say we like the U.S. government or how it was taught in high school history books when the books say we did this and we did that to mean, LBJ made this sort of decision, right? No. It's the working class. That's our we. And that's the interest that we always need to be clear that we're talking about. And if we're talking about the capitalist class, we name it their interests, the capitalist interests. And I couldn't agree more that what's needed is a global anti-war movement, an independent struggle, including strikes of American, Iranian, and the international working class in order to defeat U.S. and Western imperialism. So a few other points. While working people in Iran are obviously the most brutally affected by this, ultimately war is paid for by the working class internationally. As the cost of living is already going up, we're now seeing dramatic impacts on oil and energy prices, and that affects working people the most. And Shama spoke extremely well to all of this. Already the International Energy Agency, which after, this war taking place, I've done more research on, and it's one of these other capitalist institutions that's used to just be a stopgap in this horrible, corrupt, destructive system that we have, that the international elites, buy into. They have released more than 2 times the amount of oil from the reserves that they have than they did during the invasion of Ukraine already. And now they're already saying that they are more than willing to release even more than that. This is the crisis that, with a flip of a switch, has been, brought upon the whole world, and the working class is bearing the brunt of it. Yeah, shame. And so we say no more U.S. military aid to Israel, end the occupation and genocide in Gaza, no war on Iran, Lebanon, or anywhere in the Middle East. And I don't have time to go into this, but I agree with the point Shama had made also, that this analysis is unique, especially and including among others on the left who take these sort of actual capitalist positions, whether they know it or not. And I also agree with the need to fighting for a general strike, and also for, labor needs to get organized to the point where working class people can refuse to load arms. And not only would this make it so that, we could stop the weapons from being sent to places like Israel and then used in the Middle East, but also in doing so, it would strengthen the organization of the working class to accomplish something like that. I mean, it would be absolutely massive. It would be tectonic. But that's the kind of shit that we need to do. And we can't stop talking about it and actually doing real work in our unions and in our workplaces to make that happen. And the last thing I want to talk about is sanctions. And I'll be brief. But these sanctions have been going on since the 70s. They are bipartisan. Both the Democrats and the Republicans have put them in place, and they've been something that's going on for decades that have decimated the economy of Iran. It affects the ability of working people to get necessities like medicine. The worst of the sanctions, actually, since the 70s, came in 2012 under Obama, and since then, basic goods like rice, the price has quadrupled in Iran. And of course, these sanctions got worse in 2018 under Trump, and now again as well. And so ultimately, what we do need is a socialist world where we take, all of these corporations into democratic public ownership. We cannot control what we don't own. And also, if it's the energy companies, we're not going to have a planet to live on if we don't take those energy companies into democratic public ownership. And so that's why we're socialists here. That's why we're organizing as Workers Strike Back. Solidarity.
We have Josie and then Natalie on our speakers list. Also just want to encourage again, even if you don't have your thoughts fully prepared, or you just have a question, small thought, that's totally okay. Again, just feel free to raise your hand, get my attention, get you on the list. Welcome, Josie.
Hi, everyone. My name is Josie. I'm a social worker here in Washington, and I'm a member of the Washington Federation of State Employees, which is the state workers union. And it's under AFSCME, which is the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. The majority of Americans disapprove of U.S. imperialism's war on Iran, and they are demanding action and a stop to the war. The main obstacle to a strong anti-war movement developing is the lack of leadership calling for mass protests and strikes, and more specifically, leadership in the labor movement. The anti-war movement against the war on Iran has largely been activist groups with practically no involvement from labor union leadership, despite the fact that the rank and file workers overwhelmingly are calling for an end to the killing. We need to stop. What is needed to stop the war will be a complete shutdown of all profits for the capitalist class who is waging a war, and this can only come by carrying out mass strike action, including general strikes, in this country and internationally, and will require the involvement of existing unions. I think we saw the success of general strikes with the general strikes in Italy, which then 10 days later led to a ceasefire in Gaza. So the strength of these strikes, especially on such a large level, can have, we've already seen just this year the massive impact that can have. But so far, the union leadership in the United States has refused to call for such actions and is completely unwilling to do so. This is apparent due to the way that we have seen them react to Trump's ICE terror, the genocide in Gaza, and the firing of hundreds of thousands of federal workers, and the gutting of budgets nationally and at the local level. This is all due to an insidious idea that prevails among nearly every labor leader in the United States that we call business unionism, which Shama spoke a lot about. But business unionism is where the union leaders believe that their role is to make peace between the bosses and the workers and come to a mutual agreement that benefits both classes. But this is literally impossible under capitalism. So in other words, these union leaders are selling out their members in order to maintain peace between themselves and the bosses while working people's living standards continue to decline. They have no intention of damaging their cozy careers, so their logic leads to making peace with the big business, but it also means that they support the bosses' parties, which is most commonly the Democratic Party. Just a few days ago, the Teamsters president, Sean O'Brien, was even kissing up to Trump and other Republicans, like Senator Mark Wayne Mullen, who has just been tapped by Trump to run DHS. And O'Brien, who is supposed to be a working class leader, has endorsed Mullen, who is an anti-union Republican, to run DHS. Workers have elected these individuals to fight for their interests and provide leadership, and instead they're sitting on their hands while thousands are slaughtered in the Middle East, while genocide continues in Gaza, and while mass displacement among our working brothers and sisters in the Middle East has surpassed 3.5 million. This disaster could and should be stopped with the international working class solidarity. Capitalism and imperialist wars are completely antagonistic to workers, and so union leaders should be fighting relentlessly against the war in Iran and the genocide in Gaza and using all means necessary to shut down the war machine. But since American labor union leaders fail to say anything or come out against this war in any meaningful way, they are giving cover to the bosses and their two parties to carry on these war crimes. This is why Workers Strike Back calls for a rebuilding of a fighting labor movement that is not afraid to go to war against the bosses. We need an upsurge in militancy in the rank and file to sweep aside the existing labor leaders who have become an obstacle to building strong anti-war movements by giving cover to the Democratic parties and warmongering anti-worker agenda. We need to elect Shama Sawant to U.S. Congress and build her campaign to bring fighting working class politics and a message to working people everywhere to give us a breakthrough that will energize workers and rank and file union members to push aside their sellout union leaders and give us an opening for an uptick in militancy not seen in the U.S. labor in decades. Thank you.
Thank you, Josie. We have Natalie up next. I've got 4 more speakers on our speakers list. So I think I'm going to close it here for the evening. Thank you so much, everyone that's agreed to come up and speak. Go ahead, Natalie. Thank you.
Hello. I am, kind of coming up. I don't have my thoughts fully put together. So as an encouragement to those that don't yet, I think it's good to do. I wanted to thank Joe for reminding me, because I sometimes even say we when I am talking about the U.S. or and I really should be certain to say their interests. And I think it's a good reminder of something that I have come up to this podium and said multiple times. But our interest is in the working class and their power. We are given two kind of false choices and told that we have to kind of go along with business as usual and pick one of these two sides, and that's it. But I want to just say that business as usual is the slaughter of hundreds of thousands of people. That is the price of business as usual. That is what's happening most of my entire life, really. Like, I voted for Obama. That was the first election I could vote in. And I really wanted to vote for that hope and change. I really wanted to vote for the closing of Guantanamo Bay, for any sort of relief from this horrible system. And what did we get? Drone bombings of citizens, like kind of extrajudicious executions of people via bombs from the sky, is what I voted for. What I got out of that vote was the slaughter of hundreds of thousands of people, the detainment of uncountable people. And the same with people who were kind of wanted to vote in the interest of breaking up a system, who voted for Trump. I talked to someone today, a plumber actually, who said to me, I love that guy, but we got to get that fucking dictator out of here. And people are being changed. People's minds are being changed by the events that are happening. People are not sitting by and rooting for this heartless slaughter of people abroad, of the detainment of people here, the execution of people here in the streets. And I think that we need to remember that our work is with the class and our heart should be with the class. And I think that we need to win over as many of them as we can, and fight for that independent power. So thank you, and solidarity.
Thank you so much, Natalie. Next, we'll have Nick, and then Dom.
I also don't have any of my thoughts prepared, but I thought it was important to get up here and talk. I really enjoyed what everybody's been saying about business unionism. I was formerly a worker at Starbucks, and I remember when I was first told that it was new policy to deny people water, that I went down to Starbucks corporate headquarters by myself with my two friends, and I went up and I approached every corporate worker that I could see and tried to have a discussion with them. And I ran into this man who was the director of the entire Seattle district for Starbucks locations. And he was like, I'll come to your store tomorrow and we'll have a meeting about it. And so guess what I had on the table? 2 big glasses of water waiting for both of us. And that conversation went nowhere. And I told him about how people rely on being in here without spending money. They rely on us for warm water to stay cold, to literally freeze to death on the streets. In the richest country in the history of the world, people are dying of exposure. We can afford a little bit of water. And so I want to take that thought, because I stood outside Starbucks corporate headquarters after I was laid off from the roasteries where I worked in Capitol Hill. And I had my coworkers there with me, and I was trying to convince these corporate workers to care about how their actions impact not just their community of us in Seattle, but the world. And I had people cry in my arms because they agreed with me. But yet there's a disconnect, because they go to work and they don't see how them going to work is killing people. And my question to you all is, I was incredibly inspired and filled with hope from Mamdani's race in New York City and Kat Abaguzaleh. Their politics really are what a lot of the things that we're fighting for. And so my question to you is, how do we bridge that gap of democratic socialists and people who we agree so much on? Like, we agree on so much more than we disagree with. And yet I stood outside that corporate headquarters with these people who cry, telling me they agree with me, and nothing happens. So, and the biggest thing that inspired me about Mamdani's race was that he got regular people to actually believe that their actions could impact the community around them. And there was a man outside as I was coming in who said he's had beans, breakfast, lunch, and dinner for the last 9 days. And when we told him that we're fighting for him and that we're fighting for a better future for all of us, he had no hope. He had no hope in this country. He had no hope in us. He had no hope in his community. And so I just want to know how we can bring hope to those people. Because I get it. Hope is hard to come by. It's tough. Everything is really overwhelming. And I want to hold an infinite amount of space for that. But with that, I have hope, so much hope for the future. There is so much money, and all of us agree on so much more than we disagree, that I try to spend my time imagining what this future that we're talking so much about is. Like, what does life look like if people can stay at home and not work? If these people who have worked and been overworked for so long, imagine how much creativity, like the quote of how many Beethovens have spent their lives over stoves and pianos. That is the working class. And so my question is, how do we use that and get inspired by other people to do that ourselves? Thank you, guys. Oh, and my name is Nick. Yes.
Thank you so much, Nick. I'm going to read off the rest of the speakers list. We're going to have Dom is next, Maddie, and then Reverend Jeffries, and then we'll send it back to Shama to sum us up and conclude. Dom, you're up.
Yes, I'll continue the trend of people not having super thought out things in advance. I wrote down 3 little things, and then I'm going to run out of those and probably wrap up very quickly. But yeah, I've been at a few of the protests against the war in Iran that have popped up ever since those bombings had started with Workers' Strike Back recently. And while we're there, we're campaigning for Shama Sawant. And many of the people we come across at these protests are excited by our campaign. They donate to it. They sign up for events. They start following us. They get on the text list. And they can see that we're actively putting forward a plan to actually end the genocide in Gaza and the war on Iran by cutting off all military funding for Israel and electing someone who will hold a rally in D.C. to be able to do that. Yeah, it's exciting stuff. And while there are people at these protests who support our campaigns, oftentimes we'll also find people with various criticisms around it, particularly claiming that they don't support electoral politics, which I just kind of wanted to get on and gripe about for a second. I want to take the chance to clarify that, yeah, while we can't simply elect our way out of U.S. imperialism, that does not mean election campaigns have no role to play in building the anti-war movement. The only thing that can shut down the war machine is the working class getting organized in mass, right? Holding mass protests, general strikes, civil disobedience, and shutting business as usual down until we get our demands met. But currently, though, that type of movement takes significant leadership to organize. And the leadership that is available to the working class right now, whether it is in unions or Democrats, the DSA elected officials, right? There's over 200 of them in this country. And yet, where are they leading the anti-war movement? There are leaders elected to represent the working class who are actively working against us mobilizing in any way against the genocide, against war, or against just the cost of living crisis that we're constantly being exposed to. So we do need new leaders. We need to elect new leaders who will use their platform to build that movement, to motivate people to get in the streets. Not union leaders who get in and say things like, oh, we have a no strike clause in our contract, so we can't go out and go on strike despite the fact that ICE is out killing people in our streets. And right now, as unfortunate as it is to say, I think Shama Sawant is the only politician we've been able to find who has actually used her platform to do that from the moment that she was in office throughout the entire 10 years on city council. So right now, yeah, while we have a candidate running to do that, we should be supporting her. We need to get her into Congress because that creates an unprecedented breakthrough, right? There are record popularity for things like a third party, for unions, and for a general strike. But a new Labor Party or any type of third party in the States is not just going to appear because we're wishing for it. We need to cause that breakthrough. Shama Sawant's campaign can be that breakthrough, and regular people we encounter on the streets, at their doors, or at these protests understand that. And the leaders who don't, well, maybe they do understand understand it, but they're scared of what that movement represents, so they use whatever tactic they can to try and mitigate us. Just a little frustrated by that, I suppose. That's the point where my notes run out. So thank y'all so much. I'm gonna go sit down.
Thank you so much, Dom. Up next, we have Maddie, and Reverend Jeffrey, and I'll send it back to Shama. Welcome, Maddie.
It really is. No worries. Hi everyone, thanks for being here. I'm Maddie. I'm also a member of Workers Strike Back. I'm a volunteer on Shama's campaign. And I'm also a member of Revolutionary Workers. I thought some of the stuff that Nick was bringing in is like, it's really critical and it's really important. And they're really great questions too, to think about like, we are in a time where there's so much like feelings of defeat, where so many people in the working class have like felt the continued like crush on us and have walked away with the conclusion that like there's just nothing we can do, which is of course exactly what the ruling class wants. That is exactly the aim. I just had a couple of thoughts. I jotted some stuff, but I'm also coming up pretty off the cuff about some of the questions, both about like how do we break through that? How do we get people engaged in struggle? And also like looking at these other campaigns, you know, I think that you made a great point that like there were some incredibly energizing demands, both with Zoran Mamdani's campaign and with Kat Obuzali's campaign. But I think there are some like really critical differences in how these campaigns are being approached that really set exactly the trajectory of those campaigns and like what they can do for the working class. And also, you know, what the working class can gain, not just from, you know, these elections, but from like what lessons can we learn in these moments. I think really critically, something that I've seen as a shortcoming of both Mamdani's campaign and Kat Abuzali's campaign is just like this lack of connection with like, you can have good politics on paper, you can talk the talk, but then you have to talk about how do you put that into action. And the only way that we have ever seen victories for working class people in this country is when working class people are the engine. It's when we build movements. And so if you are talking about, you know, something as transformative for so many people as affordable childcare, but you're not trying to get working people into the struggle, you're not saying, and that's why we're going to, you know, turn out to like, we're going to come out and we're going to create a rally. We're going to have escalating demands. We're going to push a movement forward so that we are putting enough pressure on the ruling class that they have to cave or concede to an even greater, you know, consequence. That's the type of movement that actually gets victories, that actually helps us achieve those like really important goals for the working class. And we've seen that in Seattle. We've seen that play out with Shama's time in office. I mean, the fact that we won a multi-hundred of millions of dollars tax on Amazon, that is massive. That is like incalculable for so many working class people to think that like we, the working class of Seattle, poor people in Seattle, unhoused people in Seattle, union members in Seattle, socialists in Seattle, led by Shama Sawant, went up against Amazon and we won. That is a lesson that is so critical and empowering. And that's exactly what these campaigns need to do. Not just because that's the only way you can win those demands, but think about what that teaches to working class people. When we walk away from a struggle like that, when we walk away from going head to head with some of the most powerful people in the world, and we fucking win, like that is how people, that's how we break through the lack of hope. That's how we reach people. And that's how we get them to understand that like, we're not just talking here. Like when we say that we, the working class, need to engage and fight, and we need to be pushing forward movements and also fighting for campaigns that are actually going to fight for us. That's why it's so critical for us to be building the movement around Shama's campaign right now. It's because the only way that we can win things is by building as a working class. And the only way that the working class can become empowered and emboldened in the way that we would need to actually exact change in this country is by learning those lessons, by struggling together, by fighting together, by learning the tactics that we need, and being able to walk away with victories and losses that we can learn from. And that's why it's so critical that we do that, that we are out in the streets, that we're out talking to people, we're door knocking, we're tabling, and we're taking up fights when they need to happen. That's why we need to be engaged all across the board. And I think it's a hard struggle, but it's also the only option we have. There's genuinely no other choice. So I think that's all I have on that.
Thank you, Maddie. Next up, we're going to have Reverend Jeffries, and then we're going to send it back to Shama. Please welcome Reverend Jeffries.
I really didn't come to say anything, but I'm sort of compelled to say something, given what's going on. It's this country has always survived on murder and violence. It seems now we are beginning to even glorify it even more. And the silence and the capitulation of many, especially the Democratic Party. I mean, they have symbolic protests, but they're symbolic at best. They are not really addressing the real violent nature and evil nature of what's going on. The murder of leaderships in sovereign countries, the starvation of people in Cuba, the intimidation of people in Venezuela, and the murder, and just the intervention in sovereign governments. And nobody seems to understand how evil this really is. I go to meetings all the time, and I don't see possibility. I see it here in this room, and I see it with Shama. Possibilities of courageousness and willingness to, even in face of outstanding odds and momentous kinds of strength, to say that's wrong and to call these people into account. They have to be called into account. And this destruction and murder that went on in Gaza, and now it's taking place, the starvation in Cuba. These are good people. Cuban people are good people. And Marco Rubio has no sense of decency or integrity or honor. He has been all over the board, and now his head is up Trump's ass. So who could really look to him to give an analysis on his own countrymen who have fought and died to preserve decency and commonality for all humanity, and created medical systems for everybody, and created accountability for everybody, and have been embargoed since they started. They did this under huge embargoes by the richest country in the world. And now to accuse the government of not doing its job when you have done everything you can to destroy the government. I think this is a time when we may not have anything but slingshots and rocks to throw at these mighty giants. But we need people like Shama, and we need people with integrity and honor to stand and do what has to be done. This has to stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Jeffries. Also, thank you everyone for speaking in our discussion today. We're going to send it back to Shama to sum us up.
For those of you who might not know, this church is Reverend Jeffrey's church. Reverend Jeffrey he's not Jeffries, Jeffrey is the lead pastor here. And Reverend Jeffrey has been a long time activist. He has fought against the Democratic Party long before I moved to Seattle, and he played a crucial role in our Tax Amazon movement. So let's hear it for Reverend Jeffrey. One of my favorite moments with Reverend Jeffrey was at the victory rally that we held at Volunteer Park after we won the Amazon tax. And one of the things he said in his speech was how he was constantly being told by all kinds of misleaders that, oh, you should not, as a man of God, you should not associate with socialists, meaning like us, our council office. And it was absolutely wonderful to hear Reverend Jeffrey stand up there and say to say that those people who tell me I shouldn't associate with socialists, I say to hell with them. And Reverend Jeffrey made a very important point tonight, which it would have been remiss, tragically remiss on our part had we not said this. And so thank you, Reverend Jeffrey, for saying this. Solidarity with the working people of Cuba. It is truly horrendous. It is really gut-wrenching to see what is happening to Cuba right now. The choking off of the economy is completely devastating. And it's not only, obviously the most immediate thing is the economic crisis and the devastation that is being wreaked on the Cuban working and poor people, but it's also the example. The Cuban Revolution is an example of workers fighting back, and we absolutely should stand up for that as socialists. We should stand in solidarity with the working people in Cuba, working people in Venezuela, working people in all of Latin America, and as Joe said, working people internationally. I think a lot of the points that were made today were a lot about the strategy for fight back, and much of that strategy, the clarity of that strategy, I think really it boils down to clarity on two things: the nature of the Democratic Party and the role played by the progressive Democrats, and the nature of the labor leadership. And as Josie said, is that an obstacle for building? I think these two things are understood. If the mass of the working class doesn't get clear on these two things, I think we will have a very hard time building momentum for our movements. And so so just to start with, I agree with Nick completely that if we talk about the opinions that people have, we have far more in common with one another than we disagree with each other. But I think again we have to apply a class lens here. If you're talking about working people, then absolutely I agree with you. Yes, we agree more than we disagree, far, far more than we disagree. So in other words, it's not just that we're sitting here in Seattle and agreeing with each other. If we talk to working people in any so-called red state, whether it's Alabama or Texas or West Virginia, undoubtedly we are going to have massive amounts of agreements with them, because they are also suffering. They are also just ordinary people somehow trying to get by and are unable to pay their rent. Their children are in crisis, and all the social programs have been completely attacked by the Democrats and Republicans. And so there's no question. Of course, we would have far more agreement with them than we would have disagreement. But if you asked me, wouldn't you have a lot of agreement more than disagreement with people like AOC if you were to get elected to Congress? Then no, the answer to that is not a straightforward yes. You know why? Because on paper, yes, on paper, AOC agrees a lot with us. On paper, Pramila Jayapal agrees a lot with us. But in actuality, no, they don't agree at all with us. They are playing the exact opposite role to us that we are playing. And in fact, they are fundamentally opposed to us because they are actually on the other side of the class divide. They themselves are not multimillionaires or billionaires, but the role they are playing as politicians is very much in favor of the class that we are opposed to. Because if we are fighting for working people, then we are automatically opposed to the ruling class, to the capitalist class, and so on. So looking at the role of the progressive Democrats is extremely important. And I thought Neil brought a very important example of what progressive Democrats actually do. This Justice for Hind Rajab Act, I mean, it's a grotesque insult to the memory of this little girl who was just pounded with bullets upon bullets. I mean, it is unthinkable to talk about this without breaking into tears. I mean, it is absolutely horrific, and it is a grotesque distortion of any concept of justice to allow someone like Sarah Jacobs to sign off as a sponsor of a Justice for Hind Rajab Act. As just to repeat what Neil said, Sarah Jacobs in April 2024 voted for a bill that included $17 billion for the genocide in Gaza. Every bullet that went into Hind Rajab's body, Sarah Jacobs is responsible for. Every bullet that went into Hind Rajab's body, Adam Smith is responsible for. And so what Jayapal is actually doing here is exactly what Neil said. She is allowing, and this is the purpose of progressive Democrats to even exist in the Democratic Party, is she is allowing Sarah Jacobs to launder her pro-genocide reputation and act like somehow all of a sudden she gives a shit about Hind Rajab. And similarly, just to give you another example, Pramila Jayapal also has brought forward twice, she has brought forward this thing called Dignity for Detained Immigrants Act. It's never going to pass. If it passed, absolutely we would support it. The content of the bill, we strongly support. It's talking about actually bringing an end to the deportations and shutting down detention centers, all of this. The content of it, we strongly support. But one, they're never going to bring that to a vote. And I want to talk more about that in a second. But firstly, you know whom she invited as a co-sponsor of that bill? Yes, Adam Smith, who voted to create ICE and who has voted repeatedly to fund ICE. Pramila Jayapal has invited Adam Smith as a co-sponsor. The other person she invited as a co-sponsor is Hakeem Jeffries, another genocidal Democrat. And so the actual role played by the progressives is to whitewash the pro-imperialism, pro-billionaire agenda of the Democratic Party. AOC went from carrying out a peaceful occupation of Nancy Pelosi's office to calling her Mama Bear and working alongside her. And so that this is why, because that is the purpose of the progressive Democrats. The purpose of the progressive Democrats is not to do progressive things. If that was the metric, then they have miserably failed. So even if that were true, that it's not working, for fuck's sake. Sorry, Reverend Jeffrey. Even that's not working. But that is not the actual purpose of their existence. The purpose of their existence is to keep people forever trapped in the two-party idea. That if you hate the Republicans, go vote for the Democrats. If you hate the Democrats, go vote for the Republicans. And forever remain trapped in this dynamic, and so that working people never feel that actually, what we need to do is to break out of this and build independent movements and build our own independent party. And that is why these progressives never bring to a vote any of the bills. $15 an hour, canceling student debt, Medicare for all. They don't even bring bills to a vote that can fail. Okay, you brought a bill and then you didn't get a majority vote, fine, it's a first step. But the reason they don't do that is because their purpose is to launder the reputations of other Democrats. And so if they brought a bill to the vote, then it would be the opposite of laundering, because then it would force the corporate Democrats to say where they stand. And Pramila Jayapal and AOC are never going to bring these bills to a vote in a million years. But leave aside all of that, let's use the lowest possible metric to decide whether somebody is progressive. The lowest possible metric is what? Just look at their own voting record. Leave everything aside, just look at the voting record, and then you might think, but at least their voting record shows that they're progressive, right? No, wrong. If you look at Pramila Jayapal, for example, she voted to fund the Iron Dome repeatedly. AOC also effectively voted to fund the Iron Dome, once by voting present, just, refusing to vote no on it. And the second time she refused to vote yes on an amendment that would have cut funds from the Iron Dome. Every House Democrat voted to break the railroad worker strike in 2022. I am sorry, no strike breaker gets to call themselves progressive, ever. And if that wasn't bad enough, Pramila Jayapal actually has also voted yes on some of the NDAA bills. The NDAA is the National Defense Authorization Act. It is basically approval for war spending. That's the bill that the Democrats voted for in December, and that's the money that Trump got for the war on Iran. So Pramila Jayapal voted no on this particular one. But if you go and check you just have to Google this information, you'll find out some of these previous bills Pramila Jayapal did vote yes on. So even with the lowest possible metric of is your voting record progressive, no, they failed that test as well. And Nick mentioned Kat Abu Ghazaleh and Zoran Mamdani. The fact that they had some prominence, and Mamdani, of course, won the election, all of that is a positive thing in the sense that it reflects the anger in society. It reflects that working people are looking for actual progressive policies, and that just a nakedly pro-corporate, anti-worker Democratic Party image isn't working for them. Clearly it isn't, because the Democratic Party's approval rating is in the toilet. But what are these individuals actually doing? If you look at, just to be clear, everybody knows, I don't know if it was mentioned earlier, but yes, last night was the Democratic primary in Illinois, and Kat Abu Ghazaleh lost in the primary. So she's not in the general election because she chose to run as a Democrat. But if you look at her campaign program, she has lots of words about Palestinians. You know what words she doesn't have anywhere? Is ending US military aid to the Israeli state. She does not even have the word embargo. Embargo is a weaker version because it would be a temporary thing, but we would support an embargo. Yes, absolutely. But she's not even calling for that. And as far as Mamdani is concerned, the demands that his campaign ran on, they were tremendous. We support every single demand. But what has he actually done since he's come to power? He reappointed the arch-Zionist billionaire Jessica Tisch for the New York Police Department. He is now continuing the surveillance system in the city. He has allocated $94 million to continue the surveillance system. That surveillance system is so massive and so all-encompassing in the 5 boroughs, it's been called the Ring of Steel. And this Ring of Steel, this data is what's used by ICE, by the way. It's already bad enough because it lands on the phones of the NYPD cops, and it's used to target poor and working people. But it's even worse than that because that's the kind of data that gets shared by ICE. And there are many examples I can use of how Mamdani is betraying. But to quickly summarize all of that, it is that most of these people, they are infected with what you would call careerism. So in other words, I don't care what good intentions AOC or Mamdani had or have. None of those help working class people. Doesn't matter what intentions you have in your brain. We're not obligated to be mind readers. What matters is what you do. What do you actually do? And if by your doing, by your actions, you are clearly demonstrating that you prefer to protect your own career, your own skin, your own ability to live peacefully without having a target on your back from US capitalism, then you have shown yourself to be a betrayer. That is all that matters for us to know. And I think it is not this metric that we use, like somebody careerist. That is not only for the Democrats, it also applies to other movement leaders, including the labor leadership. And that is why Josie is dead right that we have no avenue, and also as Maddie said, we genuinely have no other choice but to fight to overcome the labor leadership. We cannot sidestep them somehow and yet win victories. We have to take the battle directly and challenge those business unionist ideas, because what the labor leadership is doing is also engaging in careerism. They prefer to protect their careers because it is easy to get a 6-figure salary, but it's not just about the money. It's also about the fact that you don't want a battle with the ruling class. Because if you dare to do what we did, Absolutely, you become enemy number one of the ruling class, and they don't want to do that. And it is shameful that somebody as prominent as Teamster leader Sean O'Brien is now kissing up to Marquane Mullen. I mean, Marquane Mullen is one of the most reactionary, right-wing, anti-union, anti-worker politicians. He is, Trump's acolyte. He's also said, famously, he said, that he's advocating for violence against journalists who write news that is not favorable to Trump. These are horrific people. And so absolutely we have to understand that this is class warfare. We didn't choose it to be so. It is class warfare because this is the system. It is not our system. We didn't make this system. We don't want the capitalist system, but we are here and we have two choices. Either we roll over and accept all the injustices, or we fight back. And I thought that, just in terms of what Nick said, I think it really encapsulates what we are up against and why we need to fight, which is that the capitalist system is so horrendous that the Starbucks Corporation, I didn't know this, thanks for sharing this, Nick, is actually, it's a company-wide policy to deny water to anybody who doesn't buy something in the shop. In other words, it's a nakedly anti-homeless, anti-poor policy. Can you imagine coming to this point where you deny water? I wouldn't deny water to these billionaires even though, billionaires shouldn't exist, but if they want water, fine, they can have water. But they are not, this is how inhumane and absurd this system is. So what Nick shared is very important for us to recognize, is that individual people, they'll come and cry in his arms saying, yes, you're right. But that's not just the billionaires or the executives. This is what the Democrats do. This is what the labor leaders do. I cannot tell you how many times Democrats on the city council came to me privately and cried about how they agree with me on everything. But look, Sharma, this is not the right time. We need robust studies. First of all, we need to appoint subcommittees to discuss this. We cannot just do the Amazon tax. Like, what, are you crazy? We can't just do the Amazon tax. We can't tax the billionaires. Why not? The billionaires have become trillions of dollars richer, and we are barely able to pay our rent. The least they should be doing is paying the Amazon tax. And so I think just to close out, I spoke for longer than I intended to, but the discussion was so incredibly important. I thought it's important to come bring it all together. Just in closing, I wanted to say that Joe made an important point that because this capitalism is posed as class warfare, we should not make the mistake of thinking that everybody is on the same side. Everybody is not on the same side. It is us versus them. And they say, oh, you're all about us versus them. You should say, yes, absolutely. Because capitalism as a system is an us versus them system. It is a zero-sum game. The profits for the bosses come from leeching, robbing from us. And if we are to win anything like free healthcare for all funded by taxing the rich, it has to come from the profits of the bosses. There is no other way. It is a zero-sum game. And we should wear our working class solidarity as a badge of honor. We are proudly against the billionaires and multimillionaires, and we are here to fight, and we're here to win. Solidarity.
Thank you so much, Shema, and thank you everyone for that fantastic discussion. I completely agree. In fact, we went a little long, which is, but I think it was an incredible discussion. Before we end our meeting tonight, we have Workers Strike Back. Again, we are a fighting organization. So in addition to discussion, political education, it is also about what we're going out and doing and fighting for. We're going to have 3 speakers talk about some activity, some work that Work Strike Back members have been doing recently or work that's coming up. But of course, before we move on to that activity point with those reports and upcoming events, including an update on the Shama for Congress campaign, first thing is that we're going to hear from Dom about what it's going to take to build Workers Strike Back, what it's going to take for us to become a fighting organization that can help build the Shama for Congress campaign and to make an impact on everything that we were just talking about in the discussion. Dom, of course, already spoke, so you know him, but just to introduce a little bit further, Dom has been a member of Workers Strike Back 3 years. During that time, has been an incredibly active role in Workers Strike Back, including fighting to protect the $15 minimum wage, fighting to protect renters' rights when the Seattle City Council was attacking those rights. And Dom has been actively campaigning every week, fighting to get Shama elected. So let's hear it for Dom.
Yes, thank you. I joined Workers Strike Back at the launch, which is almost 3 years ago this month. So it's really exciting to see how the org's grown. I'm really proud of all the work we've done. Now, we need Shama Sawant in Congress because she's a principled and relentless fighter who has won historic victories that are unparalleled in recent decades. Our campaign currently is fighting to end the wars, for free health care for all by taxing the rich, for shutting down ICE and detention centers, for rent control, and for a new party for working people. And as y'all know, winning this campaign will take resources, and we are up against both parties of big business, the Zionist pro-genocide lobby, and the billionaire class at large. So today I'm going to ask y'all to donate to the Shama for Congress campaign. But first I want to speak more about what we are up against. Shama's opponent, who's come up a little bit tonight already, the genocidal Democrat Adam Smith, is a general amongst the war hawks. Today, Smith is responsible for the genocide in Gaza and the blank check used to fund this current war in Iran. He's been in office for nearly 30 years, my whole life, the whole life of many people in this room. And he has sold out the working class for every single year he has been in office. That includes voting for the war in Iraq and countless other wars in the Middle East. Adam Smith voted to literally create ICE. And one of Adam Smith's first acts in Congress was to cut $150 billion from Medicare and Medicaid in the 90s with Bill Clinton as president. He has also voted to break the railroad strike in 2020 or 2022. And voted for tens of billions of dollars to fund the genocide that continues to take place in Gaza, and serving as chair of the Armed Services Committee when the Israeli state ramped up the purging of Gaza's population in 2023. And if all of that wasn't bad enough, he voted repeatedly to defund United Nations food aid to Gaza, and all of this because he's in the pocket of AIPAC and the Zionists. He has received over $1.3 million from the pro-Israel lobby and their mega donors in his last campaign. Adam Smith has, by no exaggeration, the blood of millions of people on his hands, and he's been rewarded for that bloodshed by the weapons manufacturers, by Palantir and Microsoft, the companies profiting off of the damage that he's caused. So the maximum amount you can donate to the Shama for Congress campaign is $3,500. Is there anyone here who has already donated that amount to this campaign? Round of applause for these folks, y'all. Our median donation to the campaign is simply $25, though. So, who here by a raise of hands can donate $100, $50, $25, or any other amount to the Shama for Congress campaign today? We've got volunteers coming to help y'all process those donations. And then while they're doing that, I'll also say that towards the end of her city council tenure, Shama helped to found Workers Strike Back, the organization that is in this room today. And the intent of that was to spread the lessons of this movement in Seattle nationwide, right? It's not just renters in Seattle who deserve the protections that we've won. It is people all over this country, and we have started fighting, whether it's in New York City, Peoria, Illinois, Michigan, wherever, right? Members of Workers Strike Back donate an amount each month as dues, and our average is $20 a month, but you can donate any amount. So if there's anyone here today who has not joined Workers Strike Back and wants to sign up today or can increase their monthly dues, please do that as well. This is how we build a fighting movement to be able to take down the billionaires. Thank y'all so much.
Thank you so much, Dom. Also, thank you so much, everyone, for your donations. I don't know if everyone here also saw the Shama for Congress campaign sent out an incredibly exciting email going through everything that the campaign has accomplished, including raising over $450,000, which is, that's right. Over 4,000 donations, and the average donation is only $25. That is absolutely incredible. And also thank you everyone, Workers Strike Back members, donors to Workers Strike Back that help make this organization function, help us set up our live stream, help us set up our national organization. We just had our national meeting this last Sunday that was on Zoom. And of course, we were having exciting developments in other places in the country with Workers Strike Back growing as well. So last thing on our agenda today, before we can get out of here, is we are going to talk about how to take action. Workers Strike Back is out as an active fighting organization. So we're going to have 3 people come up and talk about what, how Workers Strike Back, how you can take action and what we've been doing these last couple weeks. First is we're going to have some Trauma for Congress campaign updates and also upcoming events. That's going to be from Justin. Justin, are you ready? Cool. Please welcome Justin.
Yeah, thanks, Joan, and thanks everyone for that great discussion earlier. My name's Justin. I'm the campaign manager for Shama's Independent Socialist Campaign for Congress. So we launched this campaign to elect Shama Swat to Congress last year in the context of historic unpopularity of the Republican and Democratic parties, fueled by anger that both have supported the genocide in Gaza and both have attacked the living standards of working people and also attacked the labor movement. This situation has continued and deepened with Trump's ICE terror campaign and the lack of fight back from the Democrats against any of Trump's attacks on working people. In fact, the Democrats have joined in and enabled most of Trump's attacks. So this one thing that didn't come up yet today is they voted to create and fund and expand ICE for decades and even voted for the anti-immigrant Laken-Riley Act in the first month of Trump's second term. So that was a law that further criminalizes immigrant people, vastly expands the detention and deportations, and increases the scope and powers of anti-immigrant lawsuits. They, of course, voted for the $900 billion military budget that Trump is using for the war on Iran, which we discussed. But this working class anger against both parties has created an opening for a wave of progressive Democratic challengers to the Democratic incumbents across the country. But, this came up a lot in the earlier discussion. We've seen the track record of these so-called progressive Democrats. We talked about the even at the most bare minimum level, what Shama was mentioning of what votes they've taken. AOC and Pramila Jayapal have not lived up to any kind of sense of what we think of as a progressive. One person who didn't come up yet today is Seattle Mayor Katie Wilson. So, and a recent piece of news on that front is, according to the Seattle Times, Katie Wilson, the new, self-identified Democratic Socialist mayor of Seattle, recently drew, quote, sustained applause from business executives when she said at an event that Seattle's Amazon tax puts them at, quote, disadvantage. Wilson also assured the business executives that she, quote, will be doing some significant reprioritization, otherwise known as cuts, end quote. This is what we're seeing from the so-called progressive Democrats. Shama, of course, is a fundamentally different type of leader. She's refused to become a careerist, she's refused to sell out, and she's relentlessly fought for working and poor people and won unheard of victories. Our Shama for Congress campaign is once again totally unique. Shama is running independent of both the Democratic and Republican parties, and our campaign is a fighting campaign. We've gotten a tremendous response to our independent revolutionary socialist campaign to elect Shama. To put some numbers on it, we have over 4,000 individual donors to Shama's campaign so far, from working people in all 50 states, DC, and Puerto Rico. That's 4 times as many as our opponent Adam Smith got in his entire last election. And we still have 5 months left in this primary election fight. And those are 5 months when working people are going to be paying even more attention to elections and looking for candidates to support. With those thousands of donors, we have raised over $450,000, as people mentioned, including pledged monthly donations through the end of the primary. And that's more than twice as much money as any previous left challenger to Adam Smith. And again, we still have 5 months left in this primary election to blow that even more out of the water. So when we go out and talk to working people, they overwhelmingly agree with all the demands. Shut down ICE, end all military aid to Israel, national rent control, taxing the rich to fund free healthcare for all, and a massive expansion of affordable publicly owned homes. But even more so, they understand the importance of Shamma's track record. We're leading with Shamma's track record when we're talking to people because that's the key difference that makes this the most important campaign in the country. We now see other candidates running within the Democratic Party even raising demands like ending all U.S. military aid to Israel. This is positive, and like we said previously, it's a reflection of the leaps forward in working class consciousness and of the pressure that even careerist politicians are feeling. But Shamma is the only one who has the proven fighting track record. She was in office for a decade. She went to war against the rich and the Democratic Party, led movements of working people, and won major victories like the highest minimum wage in the nation and the Amazon tax, and never sold out. Working people understand the importance of this, and also the fact that, unfortunately for us, this kind of track record is unique at this point. But the best way for us to make this track record not unique, to inspire other working class fighters, is to elect Shamma to Congress to demonstrate this relentless fighting approach at the national level. Because of Shamma's history, though, the billionaires and CEOs and the Democratic Party will do everything in their power to keep her out. We have a real shot to win, but only if we keep fighting. We got a recent update about Adam Smith that from this group Track AIPAC. They updated his donation amount received from Zionist groups like AIPAC to over $1.3 million throughout his career, most of that donated in the past few years. Smith will have millions more dollars coming in from a whole array of groups and individuals who want to maintain the status quo of war, genocide, and exploitation of working people. The billionaire class and the Democratic establishment won't stop at that either. It's possible that they will try to run so-called, as we've discussed, so-called progressive candidates in the race to try and convince people that they should not vote for Shamma. They tried to do this in 2019. We still beat them and reelected Shamma that year, but that also means we will have to fight hard again this year. So we have some upcoming events to build this fighting campaign. And hopefully we can share links in the chat so everyone can sign up for the different options. Most importantly, if you're in the Seattle area, you absolutely need to be at our upcoming Spring Volunteer Day on Sunday, March 22nd at 11 a.m. It's going to be at the Othello Playground Park. We're going to be talking to working people all over the Rainier area of Seattle, focusing on our demand to tax the rich to build millions of affordable publicly owned homes. So can I get a show of hands? Who here is going to make it out on Volunteer Day on Sunday? All right, awesome. I'll be there. That's excellent. And, for anyone who's new to this kind of thing, we make it very easy. You'll be paired with someone who's experienced, who you can shadow to learn the approach we take. For volunteers outside of the Seattle area who are, might be on the live stream, we have a phone bank coming up this Saturday to help get people out to Volunteer Day. So hopefully people can sign up for that. We also have a few big fundraising and supporter activating events. So there's a concert Friday, March 27th, and Neil, who spoke earlier, has been playing a big role in helping to organize that. I'll let Joan talk about let's have a round of applause for Neil. I'll let Joan talk about a tech worker event we have coming up. And there are many other volunteer opportunities on the website basically every day. So I encourage people to just check out the website, sign up for whatever you can. And just there's the last thing, very excitingly, we got the opportunity for Shamma to do a speaking tour in the Bay Area that's going to start Friday of this week. So she's going to be there touring a bunch of cities around the Bay Area, raising funds with other groups that are supporting this campaign in California, raising funds for this super important campaign. So for anyone on the live stream in the Bay Area, look out for upcoming info about those events for the speaking tour. So thanks everyone, and solidarity.
Thank you, Justin. Next, we're going to have Matthew come up and speak. Just real quickly, a quick report back about a protest that Workers Strike Back members went out to at the convention center about that defense contractor convention that we were at. Matthew, are you ready? Cool. Let's hear it for Matthew.
Thank you, everybody. My name is Matthew. I am an organizer with Shama's Campaign for U.S. Congress. I'm a Workers Strike Back member as well. Thank you so much for a fantastic meeting, everybody. It was great hearing everybody's thoughts. It was an amazing discussion. It was an amazing sum up from Shama. But yeah, as we talked about earlier, so we were, and as Shama shared, we were at this weapons summit today. Over 700 war profiteering companies came to Seattle. The Democratic Governor Bob Ferguson said he was proud to welcome companies like Lockheed Martin, RTX, formerly known as Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, General Dynamics, Boeing. These are the top 5 war contractors in the United States. Ferguson was also welcoming companies like Palantir, which our opponent Adam Smith is the 4th highest recipient of money from. So he's received over $100,000 from Palantir. These are all companies that have been contracted for the genocide in Gaza and the court war in Iran. And all these companies have just promised Trump that they will quadruple production of weapons for the war. We were there today to talk about, Shama and her fighting record, something we've talked about, a lot today. People talk about the fact that, working people are angry, but working people have, very little time and very little money. So like what they put their time and money to should be fucking effective. We do not need to just endlessly protest and have it go fucking nowhere. Today we saw, this protest that was led by, a number of left groups, and there was barely 200 people there. This was this top 700 weapons manufacturers companies in the world. And there was barely 200 people there because working people don't see, endless protests as the way forward. We were there to talk about our strategy and Shama's fighting leadership. And we got an amazing response from it. Working people that were just like, what the hell is this about? You guys are articulating actual demands. You're not speaking in vague activist terms. Like you have an actual way forward for this movement. And incredibly shamefully, the organizers of this meeting did not let Shama speak. They did not let Shama speak because what these people do not want to do is what we talked about today. They do not want to go face to face with the Democratic Party. It will not make you popular among activist groups to fight the Democratic Party. Let me tell you that. And will also make you not popular fighting the labor leadership. And that's what these activist groups refuse to do. They want to act like they're competing small businesses, and instead of actually building a fighting fucking movement. They're deeply unserious, and that's why we bring this strategy forward, and that's why we go to these events in order to talk to working people about our strategy, because it is worth working people's time and money, as I said, which working people have very little of. So, that's just a quick report back from the event today. And as I said, I hope everyone comes as I said before, hope everyone comes to the Spring Volunteer event because, we need to share these ideas. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Matthew. And lastly, I'm going to be speaking about our upcoming tech workers for Shama meeting. That meeting is going to be on March 29th at 2 p.m. Pacific over Zoom. So, of course, if anyone here is watching on the live stream, you can sign up for it also. I'm a tech worker. I work at Kickstarter. I'm a member of Kickstarter United, which is the first union in the American tech industry. And last fall, our union went on strike. We went on a 42-day strike, and that strike was the first of its kind in the entire tech industry. And we should be enormously proud whenever really any new workplace unionizes, whenever any new union goes on strike, because it is so difficult. It is so challenging, and there's so many obstacles in your way. And unfortunately, the union bureaucracy, the union leadership is one of those obstacles. We've talked about a business unionist approach, and just to sort of talk through what we had to go through to actually fight to get a strike to happen. My union was the first local in our local to go on strike in 13 years. And it took us 3 months after our contract expired for us to get approval to go on strike. Right? Those are the kind of obstacles that put workers on a disadvantage, right? I think Shama said it, right? This is class war, and it is not something that we chose. And when our leadership of our unions is not actually setting us up, it's not arming us to fight and to win, it's setting workers up for failure. And as a Worker Strike Back member, I've been a member of Worker Strike Back since it's founded. I've been a socialist organizing for several years before that. With Worker Strike Back, we were able to describe and talk about a class struggle strategy that the union leadership wasn't offering, right? This involved, public rallies. It had mass pressure on the bosses. Again, contrasted with this business union strategy of just sort of quietly, privately going to the so-called bargaining table, where you sit across from the table with your bosses and try to convince them to give you what you want, which goes absolutely nowhere. And Shama and Worker Strike Back, on the other hand, had our backs the whole way. Shama came out to our picket line. Worker Strike Back organized a solidarity rally here in Seattle on the first day of our strike. Worker Strike Back, Shama, as an elected member of the National Coordinating Committee, donated $1,000 to our strike fund that Shama announced at one of our pre-strike rallies that we had. And this approach, right, this fighting approach, the fact that we went on strike, that we fought for it, that is why we won our second contract. That is why we won gains on our second contract, including fighting for strong hour protections, including a 4-day work week, and also a salary floor tied to a cost of living, which are huge, huge benefits, especially to win in a new union in an industry that is not unionized and has no history of striking whatsoever. But of course, we know this is class warfare. So the bosses are not just going to take a defeat silently, right? And so in retaliation, Kickstarter, my employer, had started firing rank and file members who led the fight in that strike. Recently, we held a rally against this retaliation that Shama, our union, invited Shama to speak at. And so Shama has already shown up in solidarity with us and demanded that these workers get their jobs back, that the bosses stop retaliating against striking workers. So that's why I'm organizing this event, helping organize it, this Tech Workers for Shama event. There are so many tech workers that want to organize, that are feeling the pinch, the constant pressure of layoffs, of ramming AI down workers' throats, who are facing reduced job security, who are completely on the back foot, who want to organize, who want to fight, but there is no coherent leadership, right? There is just a complete wall. There's a complete obstacle. There's such a gap between what workers want to do, what they are capable of, and what is on offer by the current leadership. And that includes the union leadership, and that includes the Democratic Party so-called progressive politicians who the union leadership is tied at the hip to. So that's why I am helping organize this Tech Workers for Shama event, because we absolutely need Shama as the fighter in Congress, right? And we need tech workers, many of whom are in this area, many of whom are in this district, who work for corporations, whose CEOs have donated to Adam Smith. We need the workers to back Shama. We need to fight for Shama to get elected. So if you know any tech workers, if you are a tech worker, we have flyers at our table. Take them, share them with your coworkers. Spread the word. We have a link to the event on our website, on the Shama for Congress website. So again, that is going to be March 29th, 2 p.m. Pacific, over Zoom. And we need every person there. And again, the tech workers, the tech industry, it's much larger than you'd think of just sort of, what you typically think of, right? The tech industry, especially in this area, has been an enormous part of the sort of economic growth of this area. So that includes, not just sort of traditional office workers, but any, there's so many jobs that fall under this flag, especially non-unionized workers. So if you know someone that would be interested who wants to fight, invite them to this meeting. And with that, pass it back to myself as chair just to wrap up this meeting. That's the last activity that we're inviting folks out to. Thank you so much, Justin, for inviting people to our upcoming Shoma for Congress events to fight, to get out there on the streets, talking to working class people. We have many events coming up in the next month before our next in-person Seattle Workers Strike Back meeting. And so with that, we'll close it for today. Thank you so much, everyone. Solidarity.